today is Smoky Mountains, and I'm so happy to do this. I'm going to put my hat on so we can get started. So the Great Smoky Mountains is an amazing park. It is also one of its kind. It's one of the few parks that has such a rich history. All of them do, but this one is a little bit more unique, as we'll get into. So we will start this meeting with a kind of like a beautiful inspiration of overview of the Great National Park. And then we'll go immediately into the history. And then Adela will have a couple of videos on that. And then we will go into what's to see in the park. And then we'll do questions and answers at the end. And there's some like fun little Easter eggs at the end. So the first thing is Great Smoky Mountains National Park is back east. And it is one of the few parks that when the national park system was going, that it was one of the few parks that started back east. So with that, Adela, are you ready to show the first inspiration video?
Most popular national park in America is in the Great Smoky Mountains.
A little bit of an overview of the national park. All right, now we're going to go I'm going to share my screen. We'll go into a little bit of the history. Okay, so the Great Smoky Mountains, and this is a different story than the other parks that came before it, because becoming a national park for this was a lot easier, a lot more difficult.
Luckily, the water, the machine is cold water.
Back east, and there were a lot of people living back east. Most of the national parks that came before was in the west, and nobody wanted to live there, like Yellowstone. So they decided that they wanted to have a park back east, and this is where they decided they wanted to focus their attention on. Well, the first thing you have to know about the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is that it is very old. The actual mountains in the Appalachia are some of the oldest rock on the planet. It was basically made about 1 billion years ago, and about 400 million years ago, there was a large earthquake, and everything that came up from the sea is now the mountains of Great Smoky National Park. Earlier, joining the national park system took a lot of money and a lot of hard work, and also thousands of people. It was one of the older parks, and like I said, Yellowstone was fairly easy because there was nobody there. The government already owned the land, and it was easy to put in a national park system. However, the land in the Great Smoky Mountains had been homesteaded, had been purchased, and that was a lot different. And there was also some timber companies in about 1900s. So they had to buy as well. Now, 9,000 years ago was the Cherokee Society that was there. And they, of all the tribes in Northern America, was some of the most developed hierarchy tribes that were here in the United States. The actual, this gives you a little idea. This was their village. These are permanent villages, and they were a matriarchic society. The children took their clan from their mother. They lived in these small communities. They had like their own reading, writing system. There was politics. They were completely developed structure. But in the 1830s came the Northern Europeans, and also the Trail of Tears. You probably all know a little bit about that, but that is when they were basically rounded up. It happened right around the gold, and they were sent to Oklahoma. A lot of them did not make it, but a lot of them also intermarried. They also hit a place called Cherokee, and they continued to thrive. In 17 to 1800 was when the actual European settlers started to come. It was very, very primitive. It was when you ate the things that you grew, you tilled the soil on your own, and you built your house with the timber in the surrounding areas. And another fun little fact is that in 1802, it was actually a woman who was the first settler. Now, it's a little bit of a, kind of a gray area here, because William Ogle actually created the home. He started to cut all the wood, and he had the plans for it. But he died just before they could actually move into the house. So it was this gal, Jane Husky, who moved there with her brother and her 7 children. And it was the cabin that was settled in the area.
7 children.
7 children. And another interesting fact too, this house is downtown in Gatlinburg. Originally, the Great Smoky Mountains area was considered part of Gatlinburg, but no longer. Like I said, they lived off the land, they hunted the wildlife, they utilized the timber for their buildings, fencing, growing land, pasteurizing, with their livestock. And also, they did a lot of give and take with their neighbors. But as decades passed, the forests became fields and the pastures, and they attended church. They became just like any other small town. But it was the 1800s where the communities grew in the foothills and the mountains. And in 1890, the idea to create a national park was starting to make rumblings. And a few far-sighted people wanted to preserve the lands. And so a bill entered the North Carolina legislation, but it did fail. It was the 1890s to early 1900s that the residents actually started to sell their land. But it was mostly the mountain land that sold first, not the pasture lands down below, which is much more easy for farming. So that's very interesting, because who else wants mountain land? The timber companies. So they started to buy up properties as well. And then the agricultural pattern changed, but not only had the agricultural pattern changed, the way the society lived there changed. There was a lot more lumbering, but it started to become, instead of a society where they traded with each other and grew their own land, grew their own food, they started to become more dependent on money. and also buying goods. But a lot of the wilderness was starting to rapidly go, and the great primal forests started to get pretty much stripped in some of the areas. Now, in 1904 enters this gentleman, and he has a lot of history with this national park. He was a travel writer, and he was also a librarian. His name was Horace Kephart. And he was actually, due to some poor health, went to the Smokies for a sabbatical. He was a naturalist, and he loved the park. He found it amazing. He wrote many books about it. But what he was instrumental in was starting to garner support to have the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And later on in his life, he was the one that was instrumental in mapping the route of the Appalachian Trail through the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A well-to-do couple in 1923 that really got involved in starting to get the monies pulled together. So while the forest acres were being decimated a bit, Ann and Willis Davis went out west in 1923, and they loved what they saw of the national parks out there, and they decided, let's definitely put one in the Appalachian Mountains. It's an amazing place. But it was tricky because it was not land that the government owned. And in the end, they basically needed to get $5 million developed in a fund before the government would give them another $5 million that they could start buying the land from the individual farmers. So they started this process. As you can see, it was 6,600 land tracts. A lot of people. They ended up getting the money. As a matter of fact, it was actually Theodore Roosevelt who put in something like, I think he put in close to 5 million himself. And here it is. They did go about doing the very grassroots. Everybody, including school kids to rich people in the world, they had money for this national park. But it was John Rockefeller who tossed in his donation of $5 million. So as soon as that happened, they knew that Tennessee was going to be able to raise the rest. In 1925, the efforts to create a national park became successful. And in mid-20s, one of the biggest people that was the most success in getting this pushed through was the Auto Club, AAA. They were interested in having beautiful, good roads that people could bring their new shiny cars on. So what did happen in 1925, September 2nd. They dedicated the Great Smoky Mountain Park for the permanent enjoyment of the people. And this is a very interesting thing. I don't know if any of you know this, but it's a free admission. It is the only national park that has free admission to the park. And it's a little bit of a gentleman's agreement. It goes back to how the park was created. Because it was created out of private lands, they really did not want to start charging toll because they had taken people's, I wouldn't say they took the people, they did have a choice. They had a choice to either stay there until they died, and then it would go to the government, or they could sell for a fair share. So they never, and they still to this day do not charge a entrance fee to the park. Right, so now we are going to go to a little bit of the history. Adela has a 4-minute, 17-second history video to show you.
Incredible mountain paradise become the Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
You really have to go back to the first people the first footprint of the people who were here. The Cherokee people, if you go talk to the folks, the elders, they're going to say that the Cherokee people have been here probably 25,000 years.
European settlers entered the story of the Smokies in the 1700s, and by the 1800s, whether by land purchase or a land grant, communities grew in the foothills of the mountains.
By the late 1890s, early 1900s, a lot of these folks were starting to sell their land. They were selling mostly their mountain land, like these hills behind us here. It was areas they couldn't clear. And there was a lot of logging companies that were coming down here and buying up land to start cutting down some of the last old growth forests east of the Mississippi River.
While acres of virgin forest is being decimated in the Smoky Mountains, Ann and Willis Davis went out west in 1923 and saw the national parks, which made these proud, forward-thinking folks want to preserve something for future generations in the eastern United States.
They started petitioning, they started working on how they could do this. And so the dreams, the aspirations, the sacrifices that were made by the people outside who lived here to raise the money to buy this land was amazing. Everything from school kids to some of the richest people in the world. At the time, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave $5 million to buy this land.
$10 million was needed to buy all 6,600 land tracts owned by individuals in the mountains.
When the logging companies were coming down through here, the aspirations, the sacrifices that were made by the people outside who lived here to raise the money to buy this land was amazing. Everything from school kids to some of the richest people in the world. At the time, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave $5 million to buy this land.
$10 million was needed to buy all 6,600 land tracts owned by individuals in the mountains.
When the logging companies were coming down through here, really that was probably the first cash money that was seen in this area, and people started getting used to having the idea of getting cash money. The park commissions in Tennessee and North Carolina basically went door to door, and they said, okay, we're going to give you a choice. We're going to give you a fair market value for your property, or you can get a lifetime lease and stay here till you die. But the issue is that you lost the rights to your land. So what usually happened was they might try it for a while and said, okay, we'll take that fair market value, which a lot of times was a lot less than what the property was actually worth.
The logging companies made the real money.
Some folks were getting $2,000, maybe up to $10,000 for their property. And I mean, what do you do when you first get that big chunk of money, the safest place that you know of? You put it in the bank.
20s, the great American word was prosperity. Now the 30s have begun and there is a new word, depression.
And then the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began.
So these folks not only lost their property that had been in their land or their families for these generations, they lost every red cent as well. You know, we would not be sitting here right now talking in this beautiful park if it wouldn't have been for the sacrifices of the people who sold their land for it.
4,000 young men worked in the park between 1933 and 1941 as part of the CCC.
The Civilian Conservation Corps was a part of President Roosevelt's New Deal program to get young men back to work back in the 1930s. One of the park historians once said that if we had not had the CCC from 1933 to 1941, we would not have the park we have today. The forest here was devastated due to logging. They plant hundreds of thousands of trees here. They built trails, they built campgrounds, they built roads.
On September 2nd, 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for the permanent enjoyment of the people.
My goodness, that's why it's called Great Smoky Mountains National Park, because it is so awesome. By the way, I want to change the name to Awesome National Park, not Awesome Smoky Mountains National Park.
And unlike many other national parks, there is no admission fee to the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm Janet Ivey for News 2.
Hi, okay. So I had one question. Does anyone have any questions?
Why is it smoky? Is it foggy?
why it's called the Great Smoky National Park. And it's actually the Cherokees that came up with this name. Of course, they had it under an Indian name, but they really called it the Great Smoky National Parks because it looks like smoke. There is so much condensation. It's actually a rainforest there. And there's so much condensation that it gets stuck in the valleys and above all the tree lines. I do call it Great Smoky Mountains. All right, so now I'm going to go on to sharing the screen again, and I'm going to show you some of the beautiful things to see in the park. So the Great Smoky National Parks, as you can see here, there's even a little bit of a, you can actually see how smoky it could kind of look. Of course, this is a little bit more blue. All right, so the Great Smoky Mountains. This is a very interesting fact. 60% away from all of the nation. So the closest areas are Gatlinburg. Knoxville is the closest airport, which is only 50 minutes away. Charlotte, North Carolina, Atlanta, and Nashville. So you can see a lot of people can come to the national park, but they can also go to Atlanta and have a wonderful vacation there as well. Here is a bit of a photograph, and this is that road that I was telling you that they don't charge anybody to come in on. Gatlinburg is here. Knoxville is up north. Charlotte, 2 hours that way. Atlanta to the south. And then you have, pardon me, Nashville to the west. So this is the entrance that most people use up here by Gatlinburg. And I just want to point out a few things. This is a very, very famous road, which we will talk about in a little while. Everything of interest here, these purple stars are where you can go see over 70 original buildings that are restored. Clingmans Dome is a wonderful another spot that you can actually go and visit. There is like a Roaring Forge nature trail here. And this is the land of Cherokee that I was telling you, where most of the Cherokee Indians that stayed, they have developed this whole area. And this has become a very huge, as you can imagine, gambling, etc. area. Again, I'm going to show you, this is a land of falls. These are some of the falls that they have at this park. We will get into a little bit more. It is a natural rainforest here. This green that you see here is the Appalachian National Park, the trail that goes through the park. One of the biggest things that is a draw here is the diverse wildlife. They have turtles and bears. They actually have a few grizzlies, believe it or not. There's only a couple hundred of them, but they are here in the park. Wild turkeys are very big. Bobcats, elk, amarillos, but this is the capital of the world for salamanders. They have 30 species of them, and they also have 14 of the frogs. But the salamanders, there's no place else on earth that they are like this. There's so many of them. Salamanders just is an interesting fact too. They do not have lungs. They actually change with their genetics, and they used to be kind of like fishes, and they were able to come out of the water. And what they do is they breathe through their skin. But the big draw to Great Smoky National Park is the falls. This is one of the famous ones called the Grotto Falls. And then there's the Ramsey Cascades, the Rainbow Falls, which is a really short, I think it's like a half a mile up here to see this one. It's lovely. You'll see this, one of the most photographed falls. And this is called the Sinks. You can actually go here and swim. This is a beautiful swimming spot. The other big draw is the 850 miles of hiking trails. This is the Appalachian Trail, which is very famous. Okay, so the Appalachian Trail. I just wanted to give you a couple of really beautiful views of this. So you can see that you can, as you go through this hike, does anybody know anything about the Appalachian Trail? You've all heard of probably like A Walk in the Woods. You've seen that movie or read the book. Basically 400 and almost 500 miles goes through the national park itself. And it was built in 1921 and it was completed in 1937. It is an entire 2,190 miles. And it is something that people like to do if they're through hikers. It is a huge, there's also the Pacific Crest Trail on the West Coast. It takes typically 5 to 7 months to complete it. Not everyone completes it. I think it's only about 2% of the people. And this gives you a little map down here. It starts in Georgia and it goes all the way up to Maine. Interesting fact with COVID that has happened, you're not supposed to be doing it, but actually quite a few people have. And it's the fastest that they could ever do it because there's so few people on the trail. It actually costs you about $3,500 to $6,000 to do this as a throughway, especially if you line up all the permits. You have to go into each, except of course, Great Smoky Mountains, but you have to have permits for your camping. You have to have permits for entrance fees. But this Lecant Backcountry Lodge is a really interesting place. And this is a lodge that's about, I think it's like a 4 to 6 mile hike up here. It is backcountry, which means that not everyone can go to it. You have to hike in and hike out only. This gives you a little bit of idea what kind of the accommodations they would have. This is their dining room. And they've been doing this for 75 years. They have food for lunch and dinner, breakfast and dinner for sure. And they actually, if you do the option for the wine, you can have $12 all night long. This is another trail to Rainbow Falls, which is the start of the going up to the backcountry. Abram Falls is some more. And this is another thing that Great Smoky Mountains is known for, which is the Scenic Drives. And here's a number of them. The two that are probably the most famous is the Tail of the Dragon. It is the #1 motorcycle and sports car road in America. And the Newfound Gap. So here's a photo of the Little River Road. And this is Newfound Gap. And the historic structures that we talked about. There's over 90. They've all been preserved, which is one of the most amazing things about having this in the national park. They preserved a lot of these. There is a place, it's called, if anybody else can pronounce this well, there's a mountain farm museum, Okan U Lufti. It's an English interpretation, meaning beside the river. And they have a assortment of old buildings. They aren't the old buildings that were there. They actually brought them in from different places and created a museum so you could actually see what life was like. And they have an apple house, a spring house, and a smokestack. This is an amazing old barn that's also there at the museum. And when you took your livestock down to the market, you would have to take it overnight. And it was too much for the cattle to go full one day to do it. So people would kind of use this as like a lodging to hold their livestock before they crossed over the mountains. And the Mingus Mill is one of the best preserved mills. There's a couple more. And then we get into a house that's a little bit more grand. Some other things to do in the park is fly fishing. You can go for 8 hours or 4 hours. And one of the biggest things that people like to do is actually backcountry. So you would be backpacking for a day to get to these spots that are very remote that probably have never seen flies. And Clingmans Dome is this wonderful overlook. As you can see, it's friendly for the wheelchairs as well as people. And it gives you a grand view. It's also right off the Appalachian Trail. And the stars is another amazing thing that you can see in the Great Smoky Mountains. All right. So now we are going to go to some videos, and we're going to show an actual scenic drive on the Cades Cove. Then we're going to see more of the waterfalls, and then we will also see a firefly light show. And then we'll take a break and we'll go back to the end, which will be all on the Appalachian Trail.
The Great Smoky Mountains are celebrated as one of the most beautiful places on Earth. This mountainous national park boasts expansive views, the largest concentration of black bears in the United States, a variety of amphibians, and a diversity of plant and tree flora that is unmatched in North America. Yet, one of its most beautiful and intimate features is its waterfalls. Over 2,000 miles of streams and rivers fall from the impressive mountain peaks that sit more than a half mile above the foothills of one of the highest mountain subranges east of the Mississippi River. Water flows just about everywhere in these mountains, and due to annual precipitation nearly equal to that of a temperate rainforest, the Great Smoky Mountains supply a continuous amount of clear, fresh water to the communities and farms surrounding the area. Where water is prevalent, life abounds, and the streams in the Smokies brim with a variety of life. Water and gravity have played together for millenniums as the dominating force shaping these mountains. There are over 100 prominent waterfalls and cascades within the park boundary. To many, visiting waterfalls is a sacred sensory experience to see nature in one of its most elegant forms. To keep up to date on all seasons and activities in the Great Smoky Mountains, and to help preserve this wonderful place, consider becoming a member of the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Visit our website at www.smokiesinformation.org.
All right. So next we're going to go do the Scenic Drive in the Cades Cove. So pretty there. So our next video is a very famous night show that they have playing in the national park, and it is fireflies. All right. So, is there any questions? Let's take a few minutes because I do want to show you two other videos that are short. One's 4 minutes, and I think I think the other two are 4 minutes as well. And it's on the Appalachian Trail. Does anybody have any questions? All righty then. Okay, well, so next what we're going to show you is a little bit of the Appalachian Trail called Charlie's Bunyan. And that will give you a beautiful view of the Great Smoky Mountains. And then we were going to finish on the Lecant lodging.
Came from that direction, Newfound Gap Road, and we are going to the Boulevard Trail and the Icewater Spring Shelter on our way to see Jump Off and Charlie's Bunyan. I've been on the AT 3 times now, once in Shenandoah National Park, once in the White Mountains, and now here. And it's my experience that at least the sections through the national parks, can't say it for New Hampshire, they're very well-trodden paths. If there's any elevation, there's steps. It's a well-maintained trail, as with most of the national parks. Very impressed. Definitely makes the hikes easy, a little more accessible, and kudos to the trail teams. So here's an eroded part of the trail. You see these vertical pieces of shale. I believe this is an example of Anarchista. My wife keeps telling me that this is a temperate rainforest, this area. It gets enough rainfall and precipitation throughout the year, but because it has winter temperatures, the average temperature doesn't quite classify it as a rainforest. And I believe it. It's rained every day we've been here, off and on. The showers come and pass very quickly, and on different parts of the mountains there may be rain. You go over the top of one and no rain. We're here at almost 6,200 feet, and it's still humid and hot. Okay, so we're at the trail junction. The Boulevard Trail continues on that way, and we are going to do the 1.3 mile to the Jump Off, then come back to here, and it looks like we've got 1.3 to Charlie's Bunyan. After a quick couple of minutes, we are to the junction of Jump Off. We're gonna head on up the trail to Jump Off. This is a little more rugged trail, a little less traveled, but I hear it's worth it. Trail crew, volunteer trail crew folks, told me that they prefer this view over Charlie's Bunyan. In one of my previous videos, I had mentioned that there's all these dead trees, probably maybe due to fire, but after reading about it, it's actually they're hemlock trees and fir trees that have been affected by the woolly aligid. It's an invasive species that destroys hemlock and fir trees. It looks like a white powder on it and ends up killing it. Say I have arrived at Jump Off. Just amazing, beautiful views here. Holy smokes. Steep cliff below me. Wow. Wow. You can see a long way today. Some clouds, but not too bad. So I think off in the distance is Douglas Lake. And then Charlie's Bunyan is right over there. That's where we're heading next.
And Charlie's Bunyan doesn't have as impressive view. What it does have, and why they call it Charlie's Bunyan, is there's this big rock formation that's like a bit of like a cliff there, and it looks like a bunion. So that's why they call it that. All right, so the next one, I wanted to give you guys a taste of a hike in Backcountry Lodge.
Or should we say, hired hooves.
Lecant Lodge used these llamas because the horses that they used previously were tearing up the trails with their hoofs. These guys have no impact on the trail whatsoever. They leave very little impact with their little hoofs. I'm hauling up food today, groceries for the crew, and a little bit of laundry too. Stuff for the guests is taken up an airlift by helicopter at the beginning of the season. So the bulk of the stuff is flown up, but what I take up is the fresh stuff that needs to be done weekly.
Just in time to hear the dinner bell ring, and now it is time for beef tips.
After 5.5 miles of hiking, John and his crew are ready to eat and relax. Since our group has a reservation at the Lecant Lodge, a reservation has to be made almost a year in advance, the cozy mountaintop hospitality and rustic appeal will be a welcome sight.
The only thing that is ever constant, the weather changes, the flowers change, the birds change. The only thing that's constant is the food. The food is always the same and has been probably for 30 years. Never changes.
Okay, you folks enjoy. Thank you.
Chris and Allison Vierden, managers of Lecant Lodge, enjoy seeing visitors react to the wilderness experience.
Once you get up here, it's, pretty rewarding. You have a real sense of satisfaction having done the hike. That's probably one of the more fulfilling things, is seeing people who've never done something like this and kind of made the reservation on a whim or something without knowing too much about it. And for some, it's the most strenuous thing they've ever done, and then they get up here and get a cup of hot chocolate, and it's just very satisfying to see someone who's just probably thought that they bit off more than they can chew, and then you see them the next morning and they're just thrilled.
The way that we seat people in the dining room, as far as the family style seating and family style dining, is that some of those people who never ever have been up here before and might be sitting at a table with someone who's been up here 40 times. So it's really cool for them to be able to sit at a table together and share their experiences.
The vast majority of people, the vast majority who climb Mount Le Conte are typically friendly people who have something in common. We've been as far away as the Grand Canyon or California and seen people wearing the I Hiked Mount Le Conte t-shirts. And it's to some degree it identifies a fraternity.
A lot of the people that we get up here have never done anything like this, and for them it's probably the biggest thing that they do all year. The whole experience is incredible for everybody.
While a trip up Mount Le Conte is an up-close experience with Smoky Mountain wildlife, the lodge itself offers a historical insight of the human relationship to the mountain. Whether it's seeing a picture of founder Jack Huff, who carried his mother to the top, or an image of Margaret Stevenson, who hiked the trails over 700 times, anyone who has hiked Le Conte is a part of a common thread.
Hey, and that concludes today. Le Conte is about, I think it's 2,000 feet elevation gain up, and it's about almost 6 miles. So it takes a lot of people, sometimes an 8 to 10 hour day to get up there, but you have beautiful accommodations and they feed you basically nonstop. So it's lovely. There is a backcountry in Sequoia. There's several of them in Yosemite and in many of the other parks in the nation as well. And if you ever get an opportunity to take one of them, it's going to be the big one, which I'm so excited about because I've been there, down and up, Grand Canyon.